Good evening. Cloud technology is really one of the most important developments that we have in information technology today. It represents a big shift, which has really brought huge benefits to both consumers and providers together. Cloud has really enabled the development of new business models and products, which leverage the economies of scale to reach customers in a way that we have really never seen before. The internet back in the 1990s was supposed to really change everything back, but it's only now that we are really seeing its true potential realized. Cloud computing is perhaps the most significant development of this century. Now, for example, we can do and build anything that our imagination allows us to. However, just like any technology, cloud computing has its drawbacks. In today's Man in a Cube session, Ahmed Afrose, Cloud Evangelist, and Qartah, cybersecurity expert, will both join me to discuss this technology from a Middle East and Africa perspective. But after this short video. Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us today. So allow me to start directly in our topic today. And we were discussing actually offline before we go live about the cloud, and very interesting points, both of you, you were discussing among each other. So let's go back first to the basics, really. What is really the cloud? Is it just another computer connected somewhere else? Or what is it really? Ahmed, if you want to start.
Yeah, hi, Samer, hi, Aid, how are you guys? First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to actually talk in this channel at the moment. It's a great privilege and honor. Yeah, so what is cloud? That's really an interesting question. I think if I wear the consumer hat for a moment, I think consumers are actually using the cloud even without knowing the fact that they're using the cloud. Mm-hmm. For instance, if you take a mobile phone user, a smartphone user, when you take a picture and when that picture is backed up, for instance, it's actually backed up in the cloud. And that's cloud storage, to be specific. If you have WhatsApp messages and all those messages are backed up, it's also backed up on cloud storage, for instance. So you're indirectly using cloud. But consumers are probably not fully aware of the fact that it's really cloud. They think it's probably a server that's running in the Facebook backend, right? But it's really cloud. And I think it will be clear once I define what cloud is later on in a few minutes. If I remove the consumer hat and then wear the enterprise or the business hat, I think if we have to kind of look back a little bit and see how traditionally businesses basically operated and used IT infrastructure, in their own environment where they could see the lights blinking, and use that to support the business, right? That was the traditional model. So the cloud computing model basically is taken that to the next level, which is all about providing ubiquitous, right? I'll define that in a bit, access to resources, or computing resources or IT infrastructure resources. That includes not only network compute storage, but also includes applications and services that is actually not physically with you at the moment. However, you get the capability to access it from anywhere, and you also can provision it, manage it without any intervention from who's maintaining that, right? Mm-hmm. And that model is what we refer to as cloud computing.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so there are some very key characteristics that I think everybody should be aware of as well. I think it's very important for our listeners today to understand that there are 5 key characteristics of what defines cloud computing, right? And I think if you have a doubt, I think you should always go to those 5 key characteristics to understand, is this really something that's offered to us as a cloud computing model? Or is it something else? Right? So the first one is the fact that you should have on-demand access, and you should have the capability to self-service what you require. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if I may explain, you should be able to kind of access your storage or your computing whenever you want to. Right. And also you should be able to provision it, maintain it, monitor it by yourself. Right. That's the first characteristic that you should check. The second characteristic that you should check is if it has broad network access. What I mean by broad network access is basically you should be able to access this infrastructure from any device, from anywhere, from a laptop, from a iPad, from anywhere basically, right? Or from a mobile phone for that matter, right? So that's the second characteristic that you need to check. The third characteristic is basically the resource pooling characteristics, which means that this infrastructure that you're accessing, you should realize that it's being shared by a pool of users. It's not, although you will feel like it's dedicated to you, it's actually a shared pool of resources. Right? Of course, it's
by the virtualization technology and so on, right? This is why you can have this shared resources.
So virtually, you'll feel like it's basically your infrastructure, but it's actually sliced in the back end. To make sure that you have a piece of that infrastructure, which is called a multi-tenant model, to kind of mention a name for it. That's the third characteristic. The fourth characteristic is it's quite interesting because it's rapid elasticity, right? So you should be able to kind of scale seamlessly, sometimes even in an automated fashion based on the demand, right? So you should be able to scale that infrastructure up and down very seamlessly, depending on your business requirements, on your challenges, your traffic, etc. Right. So now, if you have that capability, that's another tick box, right?
Yeah.
And the fifth and the final one is basically a kind of it should be a metered offering, meaning that you should be paying for what you use. You should be able to transparently see what your billing is. You should be able to see what to expect per month as a usage statistic, and it should be very transparent between what the provider is providing to you and what you're using, right? So I think it's quite important to kind of understand those 5 characteristics, because based on that, you can actually determine if it is actually a cloud computing model or not.
Right. That's a very great and detailed explanation, and I can tell you, Ahmed, you have, I think, beaten the AI in this in answering this question. So our audience, we have actually asked the AI, the artificial intelligence, which is, there's a new model now built with OpenAI. You can search it. It's a new open source initiative in the US, and they're using what we call the GTP3 model, where they have trained 176 billion different data sets based on machine learning to come up with answers. So we went there and we asked it the question you can see on the screen. So the question was, what is cloud technology in simple words? And it chose the following answer, and we're giving the screenshot. It said, cloud technology can be thought of as the next step in networking. It's a way to store and access information using the internet without having to use your own server or computer. It's a way to store and access information using the internet without having to use your own server or computer. So it gave 2 different, answers. I think it's the same answer both ways. So, even the AI agrees with you. It is shared. You need the internet to access it, probably because now we have an on-prem model. It depends how we define it. But I'll move to Ayed. I don't know, from cybersecurity perspective, do you like what Ahmed is saying? He's saying if you really want something, you have to go and put it somewhere else, and you have to go and access it. So how do you see that as a cloud definition and from a cybersecurity point of view? How do we look at it?
Sure, Samer. So it's a pleasure to be on the show again, and it's a pleasure to be with Ahmed. This will be a very interesting discussion. Now, from a cybersecurity aspect, when we look at the cloud, customers, they should deal with the cloud as they are dealing with their on-premises systems. It is just the same technologies they are having on-prem. We are leveraging servers in the cloud, storage, networking, APIs, and operating systems. So it's the same concept. It's just a matter where you are hosting them. They are not hosted on-prem. They are hosted somewhere else in a different data center, and you will have access to it as an admin. So also when we look at the cloud, we have let's say three type of cloud services. So you have the software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service. And depending on the type of service you have, your responsibility is to secure your cloud workloads and data differs. So if we are looking at software as a service, it's just the data and the user accounts. But when we look at platform or infrastructure as a service, your responsibility will grow because you will have access to the networking, to the operating systems, to the overlay. So you have to extend your let's say your strategy to cover more challenges. And now when we look at cloud and why some customers they will push back from moving to the cloud. Previously, it used to be the security concerns about and the privacy about the data, whether these data will be protected or not. We have to comply with certain regulations. Are those cloud providers already compliant with regulations like PSI, DSS, or HIPAA, for example? So we are looking at, especially in 2020, we're looking at more maturity in the cloud in terms of cybersecurity because there are standards, there are regulations, and there are best practices which dictates what the cloud provider needs to do to protect the physical data center and to protect the data workloads and the systems of their customers. Now, it doesn't stop there. The cloud security, it's a shared responsibility model. So you can't just go to cloud provider X and assume that they will have 100% ownership of the cybersecurity responsibilities. They will protect their physical data center. They will protect the access to the data physically. However, you as a customer, you should make sure that you have adequate controls in identity and access management, firewalls, IPS, WAF, you name it, the same way you are doing it for your on-prem systems, but you have to do it for the cloud environment as well.
So you're saying, Ayed, I mean, we can really protect the cloud. That's what you're saying. So you're saying if I want to access the cloud, there is a way I can secure that access. Now, if I put my data in the cloud, there is a way I can secure it while it is inside that cloud. And then if I want to retrieve that data, I can retrieve it in a secure way. Do we really have the technology, mature enough? Is the technology mature enough or advanced enough to really tick all these boxes, or it's really the combination between them plus some basics that we need to always go back to when we really need to think about the protection?
I will answer it, and I will allow Ahmed also to add from his side. Now, if we look at the well-known cloud breaches that are available on the internet, you will see that there are different reasons why those breaches happened in the first place, starting from the human mistakes. The lack of knowledge of cloud infrastructure and cloud security leads to human mistakes by assuming that if I provision workload X, by default it will be secure. And sometimes cloud providers, they will have like templates, configuration templates for those workloads, and they will have like a basic configuration. Now, you as a system admin, you should review the configuration, harden it, and build your own hardened templates so that meets your regulation or meets your security requirements. Now, when someone provision a server or provision a storage and default permission, I'm just giving an example, the default permission is everyone with read permission. This means you are opening your storage or your database to everyone on the internet to have access to it, while your intention could be that it should be limited to a small number of users. So this is where data breaches and data leakage breaches happens due to access and permission mistakes, which eventually can be avoided by following the best practices, by having proper secure templates of configuration, scanning, where you can scan your cloud infrastructure, looking for improper access control and permissions, and spot those mistakes before the hackers do that. So that's where you can avoid being the next victim when it comes to cloud breaches. And the same thing can apply to firewall controls, segmentations, monitoring, and visibility. Many customers, they say, okay, when I move to the cloud, I like visibility. Now, cloud providers, they are providing a lot of logging, VPC flow logs, IAM logs, access to the network from outside. So they are providing you with the proper logging, but you have to analyze it. Some of them, they even provide some kind of analytics in the cloud to help you with detecting anomalies, but you have to leverage those things.
Ahmed, absolutely. I just want to interject there, if you don't mind, Samer, to Aid's point. I think I completely agree with you. I think the fact that you mentioned the service models, first of all, which is, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, I think based on that, the shared responsibility model that you just alluded to, I think that's so important for organizations to understand, because you might get, suppose you use cloud for infrastructure as a service. So you're going to get basically a virtual machine, and you're going to get a standard operating system image from that cloud provider. And it really is the customer's responsibility to secure that operating system to a point where you have to tighten it, harden it the way your company, your policy, your organization has determined best, or follow best practice. But don't expect the cloud service provider to actually secure that OS for you just because they provided a copy of that OS. And that is not just me saying it. It's basically the standard of cloud computing, and the service model and the shared responsibility matrix, as you pointed out, is something that every organization need to grasp and understand and not take it for granted, right? So I think it's quite, I just wanted to underline that fact, because a lot of people do tend to forget that fact. And then when, to use this word, when things go wrong, or if there is a problem, they expect the cloud service provider to actually, take the responsibility. And then you look at the shared responsibility model. Should have done that way before.
Which is a very interesting advancement in the way we control the technology. So in the past, you either own this technology, you build it in your company or your business, and you need to control it. You need to bring the people with the expertise, with the skills, and you have full control over it, and you are responsible. Or you have to take it completely outsourced, that is completely out of your reach, completely you cannot see it, completely you cannot manage it, secure it. Now, as you said, Ahmed, it's this very interesting way of a shared responsibility. I will have your data over the cloud, but you can see it, you can protect it, and you can really know what's happening in that data as if you have it in your own premise. And this actually takes me to the second topic of today's discussion, where why and how we should adopt this cloud technology. And before we comment on this one, allow me also to share what the AI has suggested as an answer for this question. So we asked the AI again, why and how should we use this technology? It's a little bit small on the screen, but I'm zooming from my end to read it. So it answered the following. It said there are two parts of this question. So it managed to know that there are two parts, the why and the how. The first one is a bit simpler than the second part. So it assumes that the why is easier. So let's see. It said, why cloud? The answer to this question is pretty obvious. Cloud is a way for running application and storing data on the internet which means that they are stored on a remote computer and you can access it from anywhere where there is an internet connection. Cloud gives you a lot of flexibility. It allows you to run applications on different computers and servers because the data is stored in the cloud. Now, I'm going to jump to the why, to the why part of the answer. And for the why, it said, so what is about the how. So it said, that's a bit more complicated question. To answer it, we must first look at the basic problems which cloud solves. The first and the most obvious problem is the cost. So cloud allows us to save a lot of money because we can use shared resources instead of buying everything ourselves. And I'm going to stop at this point. And I really love the comments because they really go back to what, guys, you're talking about, shared resources, cost. So it's really great. So again, so let's go back to the question and say why and how we should use the cloud. So let's start with the why a little bit and say, okay, I had my data on my premise. I was happy, right? I know it's secure. I disconnected the internet probably totally from my data center. Maybe I don't use it. And I can really survive. I think I can stay this way probably for the next 10 years. Would that be the best thing or no? Or there is a solution in the middle somehow, even if I'm today in a sensitive environment, sensitive business, maybe a public sector and so on. So what comes to your mind, Ahmed, around this point?
So it's really not a tough question, but it's a broad question, right?
Yeah.
And it, for me, I would always rewind it back to the business, right? Mm-hmm. So whether you might be in whatever sector that you might be in, and of course today's circumstances that we're in at the moment has really proven that fact as well, which is, how digital transformation in some way, shape, or form is so crucial to certain businesses and most businesses, I would say. And then if I rewind back a little bit, what is digital transformation? I think that's a different topic altogether. Yeah, but if I answer, going back to the question around, why adopt the cloud? I think it's really a question that's driven top down from the business. But if you really look at it, I think you can kind of put it into three categories, right? Either it's an optimization or a cost optimization discussion, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm speaking very loosely here, right? But broad categories. Either it's a optimized infrastructure, optimized cost discussion, or it's basically a transformation discussion in terms of how to transform your work. In terms of how we are working today, how can we optimize and be more efficient in terms of business processes, etc. Or I would say it's basically more build and innovate, kind of a further looking and very innovative approach that we want to take. And we want certain characteristics like that I mentioned before from the cloud itself, one of the 5 characteristics or 2 of those characteristics that we can't actually get, or it's too expensive to actually do that in the legacy kind of model, right? So I think we need to a business needs to kind of look at it from those angles, and then carve out the way that you want to get to use the cloud or adopt the cloud to solve the problem, right? I don't think adapting the cloud is something that anybody should do just because your neighbor is doing it, mm-hmm. right? So you should really critically look inside your business and say, look, there are certain things that we need to solve, and I think the cloud can help us in this way, and then drive towards that. And that's basically my opinion. Ayad, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, let me take it from a different angle, why customers would adopt the cloud. Now, if we look at organization X, where they have multiple applications that serve the mission of the organization, and they have to provide access to public users on the internet. Imagine if you are having traffic spikes around certain times of the year, or around maybe if you are a shopping website or some government entity that provides access to thousands of public users. And calculating how much it will cost you to deploy the proper systems in terms of sizing to handle the load of the thousands or maybe millions of requests coming to your data centers. And the more traffic is coming to you, the more resources you have to dedicate in terms of compute, in terms of storage, networking, and bandwidth. And add to that other factors like malicious traffic, denial of service, etc., etc. So in this case, your service will be affected by the explosion of requests, especially maybe around the end of the month, if we're talking about salaries, if we're talking about certain public services that that allow thousands of users to access the service at the same time. Now, if we need to deploy many servers, upgrade the internet, or maybe the network pipes, versus shifting those services to the cloud and go up and down in the resource consumption, where you don't need to pay for everything up front. It's just a pay as you go model. So if you are if you need to spin up 20 more VMs just to serve the extra load, and after a certain period of time, or after the load is going back to normal, you can shut down the VMs, and your billing will automatically be taking this into consideration. So it's moving from capex versus opex conversation. So you don't need to pay for thousands of servers that will be used for a certain of time, and later you will only consume maybe 10 to 20% of the compute power. While in the cloud, it is elastic. It goes up and down automatically, and there are a lot of analytics and automation that on your behalf at 12 a.m. in the morning, there is a spike of requests. Immediately the cloud will adapt, add additional VMs, add them to the firewall, create the proper access control policies and firewall rules, and it will be automatically receiving this extra traffic with pleasure. So that's just an example of why someone needs to adopt the cloud versus investing on a prem and that's it, yeah, and pay for everything upfront.
I have to say that I really love the use case of spike usage. I mean, imagine today you're in a business, let's assume airlines, right? And you know that there are special seasons where you have high requests on your website to book tickets. So imagine if you really need to spend, many computing resources and really provision them and have the proper support for them just for maybe a few days in a year or sometimes even a few hours. While now you can simply just ask for more resources. You can spike, even if you have this mostly on-prem, let's assume still hosted on-prem, you can still push and use the cloud, for these spiking requests and hours, and just use it and then go back to normal. It's just really great. That allows businesses to respond to consumer, demand as it grows. On the other hand, I mean, think about the innovation part. Today, if you're in an environment or in a company where they ask you, go test new things, try new applications, develop something, and let's see if we can solve one of our customers' problems with it. And today, if you are there and you want to do something, most of the things that we think of that we want to implement will require resources. Whether it's an application or a service, you need to put it somewhere, right? And if you have this flexibility of the cloud and you're really adopting the cloud the right way, you can really go there, have your own lab, come up with things easy. Now it's on low cost as well, so you're not really going to invest a lot to come up with something. And in the Middle East and Africa, we really see many examples around organizations now using the cloud, or even startups, by the way, are really using the cloud just to host their applications or host their services, because that's the best way. And this is why we see the startups are flourishing, across the region.
Absolutely.
What do you think, Ahmed? Does it make sense?
I mean, it makes absolute sense. I think what Ayed was pointing out also was the fact that, if you take the why solve, the previous question that you asked, why you solve and how do you use the cloud to solve a problem? And remember, we were talking about 3 categories that I mentioned. You optimize infrastructure, you transform work, or you build and innovate. If you lay it down, it's basically What I had just told was more of, optimize infrastructure, right? It's in terms of CapEx, OpEx, in terms of, having that elasticity, and that capability to scale, automation, all of that you mentioned, which was more for me, it's more of optimizing infrastructure. And that's at the beginning, obviously, or I would say, of the scale, right? And of the value realized by adopting cloud. And Samar, what you just mentioned basically is the other end of the value realization spectrum, which is, how do you use cloud to actually build and innovate, right? And I just wanted to add that, today the hyperscalers or the cloud service providers that we have, they also have done tremendous amount of research, and they've got really, really, brilliant resources, to a point where they're really pushing the envelope with innovation, right? In terms of AI, machine learning, APIs, collaboration tools, etc. And those are readily available to various organizations to actually utilize. And that's another advantage, which is way ahead in that spectrum, as you mentioned, which is how do you innovate using cloud, right? And normally if you have to build all of that ground up by yourself, it's going to take you years, right? And here you have ready-made capabilities. You have, for instance, from various hyperscalers, you have trained models on how to identify colors in a picture, as an example. Just an example, right? And if the model is already trained by using thousands and millions of images, all you have to do is to actually send the image that you want identified to that model, right? And then you get an answer, right? Like you're using GPT-3 right now to kind of get this. It's already fully, I would say, trained and learned. So that's really the other end of the scale, and that's another advantage. And it really depends, again, what you're trying to solve. If you're trying to solve an innovation problem, then you kind of look at it through those lenses. If you're trying to solve a cost problem, you look at it through those lenses. But you can also create a journey to get to the innovation, which is the high end piece, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to highlight how cloud computing is really impacting the rest of the advanced technologies that we have. So think about AI or machine learning or even blockchain. Each one of them requires a huge amount of resources. If you want to train a model, like we're now using again the GTP3, this you can imagine if you want to build 176 billion models, train it on them, how much resources you need. And this wouldn't have been possible without the cloud. Same thing, for example, for blockchain. Blockchain today, where you need a huge amount of resources to store data, verify it. This is why you have mining when it comes to cryptocurrency and so on. So again, it's all about computing resources and cloud. And it's really the base enabler for all this advanced technology. I really don't think that without proper cloud, we would have really advanced, whether it's in AI or machine learning. And by the way, to your Ayed, even in cybersecurity, because a lot of researchers today would require huge also amount of resources to understand how a malware is reacting, right? What are the indicator of compromises they're using? What could be the different models that this malware, it could be, based on some sort of an AI. So you wouldn't be able to really understand that malware unless you have also a good amount of resources to analyze it, understand it, and really, know if there is any kind of a malware today that could hit the cloud. So maybe a quick comment from your side, Aida, about this point before we move to the last section. So what could be the major attacks that, could hit the cloud today, in your opinion?
Well, this is a very interesting point, Samer. Actually, you raised 2 points. The first one is how security researchers and vendors, maybe they leverage the cloud to allow them process huge amount of data that help them to spot malwares and malicious traffic on the internet. And when it comes to analyzing data sets, it's huge. They deal with terabytes of data on daily basis, and the telemetry they receive from the sensors or from the open source data or by monitoring the internet. The huge amount of data that they receive, they require proper compute resources to to digest and analyze the data by leveraging the models, the algorithms that were built by the data scientists, so they can look for the needles in the haystack by looking for by spotting new malware files, or by spotting malicious domains or attacker infrastructure, or even emails. So there are many use cases where they can use cloud computing for cybersecurity. And that's why many security vendors today, they say, okay, I have cloud X or cloud Y, where they store their reputation data, where they have machine learning models that can't be deployed on-prem and on-site physical appliances, because it requires a huge amount of processing power and storage. So that's why they do the heavy lifting in the cloud, and at the end, the customers will receive the finished intelligence or the reputation down to their appliances, which can handle this kind of data. So that's the first part. The second part, the type of attacks, the cloud infrastructure is similar to on-prem. So you have attacks from ransomware, you have attacks from credential stealing and hijacking, misconfigurations where system admins, they leave some storage pocket or a server with weak configuration, firewall policies, or even extra exposure to the internet. And that's why customers, they need to rely on visibility and analytics to look for those kind of misconfigurations. It will be easy if you have 2 or 3 workloads, but imagine you are some company similar to Netflix, or some company similar to another huge brand, where you have hundreds of thousands of servers distributed around the globe in different data centers, and they need to protect them. So they rely on automation, they rely on analytics, scripting, APIs, to spot misconfigurations, or even to provision workloads in a secure fashion from the beginning. The idea that we need to deliver, make sure to provision the servers with the proper firewall and segmentation and security and hardening from day one. Don't wait until you have some anomalous traffic in your environment, or when someone compromises the server, so you learn it the hard way. There are a lot of free tools and commercial tools to help system admins scan and harden their cloud environment. So don't shy away from it, or don't afraid from leveraging the cloud. Sometimes the cloud might be more secure than your on-prem, because if you don't have the proper tools or know-how, even cloud providers, they have this kind of services to help you adopt the cloud.
Right. And allow me to share a comment from Sarah Amir. She says, yes, she agrees. Especially with AI, the extensive resources needed for learning and all of that, it will never be at edge or branch kind of computing, which is completely true. No one, I don't think, no matter how big the company is, or even if it's a government, can really build that huge amount of resources, especially that you cannot probably monetize it the right way to have the right ROI, and you wouldn't really need all these resources. So definitely the cloud is the answer. And thank you, Sarah, for your comment. Now, let me move to the last point in today's discussion, which is around Middle East again. And are we ready for the cloud? We are all here in the Middle East. We work with different sectors and different customers, and we have attended many conferences, and we had discussions with many professionals around the region. And many times we have this question and concern around security and regulations. In fact, we had a poll on LinkedIn just before we start the session, and here are the what people think as a big concern around adopting the cloud. So the question was, what is the main challenge preventing the fast adoption of cloud services in the MEA region? And the number one concern was the lack of regulatory frameworks, then the cybersecurity. So definitely, I mean, the having the right frameworks, and we know that some countries were faster than others, right? We know some countries, they have the standards already published, and not only published, they are adopted and they are enforced. So some of the Gulf countries, we can take UAE, for example, they have their frameworks, Saudi Arabia, and so on. And even sometimes you'll find frameworks and regulations per sector. So you'll find some for banking and some for enterprises, and that would really help them to think about how they can start adopting the cloud. But this is not the case everywhere. So yes, there are some areas that they're still thinking about this development, or they don't have it even published yet. So why these regulations are important? Why can't today a company just sit and think and say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is the service I want to adopt. I just want to go subscribe with this provider. I think they're great. Probably they're a big name globally. But when the country comes and tells you, nope, stop. There are some regulations. You need to think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And unless you have the right check on all these 5 points, sorry, I can't allow you to do that. So maybe from your side, Ahmed, first, what do you think about this point? And does the answer really start from the way you architect the cloud, or how do you see it?
I mean, that's a good question. So I believe that adopting cloud is not a big bang approach, right? And you can't take your traditional infrastructure and within the blink of an eye move all of that to the cloud, right? And I don't think anybody should do that, and I'm sure many people won't do that. I think it's quite important to kind of understand your infrastructure or your applications or your services first, and then determine basically what you can move to the cloud, what can be moved to the cloud, and all of those advantages and those 5 characteristics that I mentioned before. How can you use that as an advantage? And then you can, at a very high level, you can actually classify what you have in your environment in terms of, what's good and fitting to move to the cloud and what's not, right? I think the question now is about, the applications or the services that you think that today we cannot be moved to the cloud because of, regulatory frameworks or concerns in terms of security, etc. And I think the cloud service providers basically today have certain tools which allows you to probably move some of those workloads as well. But I concur that there is definitely regulatory framework that's rapidly evolving at the moment that needs to be considered for sure, right? And there are various reasons to that, and I think that goes beyond maybe this discussion in terms of setting policies and creating policies from a country perspective. But there definitely are certain frameworks in terms of what can be moved and what cannot be moved. And I think rather than getting stuck with what cannot be moved, I think people should, or businesses or organizations or sectors should be looking at how to take advantage of cloud by moving what can be moved, which you'll be surprised is probably, I don't know, I'm just guessing at the moment, could be majority of your environment. Yeah. So that's my opinion.
I agree. And before I go and hear Aid's comment on this, let's see what actually the AI has answered this question. So what are the top concerns again, and what about the regulations and cybersecurity? So the AI said, I agree with you. The cloud on many levels in a more efficient and cheaper way of operating. However, I do not think that governments will easily allow this implementation to happen. There are some very real concerns about the cybersecurity of the cloud. Governments are very concerned about the cybersecurity of their vital industries. In particular, they have a great deal of concern about the possibility of cloud technology and servers being hacked by foreign governments or terrorists. The key to addressing the cybersecurity concerns of governments is to develop a regulatory framework that will protect these industries from any potential attacks. It continues to say, it is very important to note that there are different levels of security. And this is actually where it's very interesting. Look how the AI thinks about security. It says there are 3 different levels. The first level is the physical security of the server room and the data center. The second level is the cybersecurity of the servers and data centers. The third level is the physical security of individual computers, physical security, so no one would go and steal that computer. And the fourth level is the cybersecurity of the computers. Now, for me, and I didn't finish the quote yet, this is where it gets interesting. So the AI ends by saying, and the last level is the physical security of the individual cloud users. So it's even concerned about the security of the human beings that are actually using the cloud. And by the way, this could be logical in a way or another, because today, if you have access to a public cloud that, working for a vendor, and you can really do a lot, right? So your physical security could be something that, companies need to look at. So moving to Ayed, cybersecurity, Middle East, how do you see it from, again, a framework and regulations? Is it making it easier to adopt? Is it making it harder? Or you think they are really, taking care of the base of how fast we are moving to the cloud to make sure it's happening in, the right way?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, Samer. And by the way, this can take hours to answer it because it touches multiple aspects. And also, I really like the answers from the AI because it is touching on multiple things that we were discussing today. Now, in terms of the Middle East, as you mentioned before, some countries are already adopting the cloud. They are ahead of others. And they release regulations and standards, the required controls that should be available by any cloud provider. So, okay, Mr. Customer or government entity or whatever your sector is, you want to go to the cloud, that's fine, but the cloud provider should meet such and such controls that are the minimum to allow you to move to the cloud. Otherwise, you stay on-prem. And that's it. Now, if you look at what the COVID pandemic has changed, one of the things that we witness, especially in the IT industry, that many organizations, they had to shift some workloads or services to the cloud due to the lack of resources or systems that they can deploy on-prem because of the shortage of supply chain. So if someone wants to deploy servers, there are no shipments, or there are huge delays, or if someone wants to let's say, increase the VPN capacity of the organization, but they couldn't deploy firewalls or VPN concentrators. Some of them, they moved to the cloud, and within a couple of hours, they were able to consume all the incoming requests. So that helped them to strike a balance between productivity and security, again, by following the best practice. Now, what I see here is that I don't think a critical infrastructure organizations will be moving sensitive workloads or processes to the cloud because of many reasons: the data sovereignty, protecting sensitive information, or even preventing cyber attacks against critical infrastructure processes like industrial control systems, SCADA, or even banking systems or utilities. So these things usually will stay on-prem because they have to meet a lot of strict regulations and standards. Now, but if you look at the US, there are some government-grade clouds which were designed to meet the strict government policies to store data and to configure the compute and storage to meet the maximum encryption standards and to maximize the security of the cloud. I believe if we start to have something similar for the Middle East, that will change the conversation. If today we are talking about standard cloud offerings to the Middle East that are designed to the smallest customers and to the largest ones without differentiating, I don't think that will attract the sensitive customers. But if we start to see some special offerings to government customers, that might help them to feel more comfortable about sending their workloads or storing the sensitive data in the cloud. Or maybe having a mix of both, maybe shifting some normal workloads to the cloud and having site-to-site VPN or a private link with the on-prem cloud. So this is like a hybrid approach. Keep the sensitive data and sensitive workloads on-prem, but shift the public-facing ones and maintain, and everyone will be happy. The cloud regulatory will be happy. The government RTAs or central banks or TRAs will be happy, and at the same time the customer will be able to have more efficiency by shifting some workloads to the cloud. So there has to be a mix of everything to make sure we are able to please those regulatory governments.
Yeah. And if you look about the way how the vendors are reacting to these regulations or frameworks, it's the same vendor, but in each part of the world, you'll see them changing the way they're offering cloud to adapt to the local regulations. And this is what we see in the Middle East. When you go to the Gulf region or when you go to North Africa, you can see how these vendors are really changing the architecture of the cloud they're offering, trying to comply as much as they can with the local country's regulations, because I mean, it's a big word. You cannot really have one rule for everyone, and you cannot really have one regulation that works for everyone. Each country thinks about what's right for them in a different way, and they want to make sure that they are protected, especially from a cybersecurity point of view and a privacy point of view. Definitely, this is a big concern. So the advice is for any company or organization: read your regulations very well, understand the frameworks, and then make the decision, as Ahmed and I had said, make the decision on what is the problem you want to solve. I love this, Ahmed. So what is the problem that you really want to solve, and what is really possible now, and do it, right? So if you can utilize even 50% and you want to go there and it complies with the regulations and you're going to save good amount of money and it will enable innovation, then why not, right? This could be an answer, to your question. But guys, just before we finish, is there a situation that you still believe, whether it's from an architecture or business need perspective to you, Ahmed, or from a cybersecurity perspective, that the organization must have or stay on-prem? Is there any situation at all that comes to your mind that you would say, you know what, probably in this situation, don't go to the cloud? Or this is not really, a question at this time we're in right now with everything we're offering over the cloud?
Well, if I may answer first, in my opinion, I think, Samer, I think, it really depends on that regulatory aspect. And of course, the security concerns are quite real. And you can't expect the cloud provider to kind of provide all of the security that's necessary for you. You have to kind of unroll, you have to kind of implement certain security standards and policies and mechanisms that would really secure what you're going to throw onto the cloud or maintain in the cloud. But I top of my head, I can't think of if the security controls and the capabilities exist and the framework also exists. I can't think of anything right now that you should physically keep with, locally at your premise all the time. If the framework permits and if the security capabilities exist, then I don't see any, I would say, roadblocks as such.
Right. What about you, Aid?
I believe I echo what Ahmed was saying. Now, my recommendation to any organization today in the Middle East, before you think about shifting to the cloud, my number one recommendation is to have a cloud, let's say, adoption strategy that can handle it from different aspects. The financial aspect, so you calculate the cost. Shall we stay on-prem? Shall we go to the cloud? The second aspect is in terms of performance, in terms of capacity. If we are on-prem, how much we need to add to meet the future growth of the organization versus if we go to the cloud, and how easy to respond to those growth requirements from the business. So today you might receive a business requirement that, okay, we have to start offering new services. how quick you can do that, how quick you can respond to competition in the market, because it's all about competition in the industry, regardless of your sector. The third aspect is, if we have certain type of services, if we shift them to the cloud, are they going to be more secure, less secure, or the same level? My recommendation before you move to the cloud, talk to your cloud provider and see how much security they can provide natively. What are the available cloud controls provided by the vendor? What is missing? Go shop for the missing components. And if there is the fourth point, which is the human factor, your system administrators are the same ones who will manage the cloud services. If you have shortage in expertise and the know-how, you have multiple options. Either send those admins to attend some cloud certifications and courses, so make sure they know the ins and outs of the cloud infrastructure, or hire someone on your team, make them dedicated to manage the cloud services from end to end, or rely on third-party service provider. So you outsource the cloud migration, the cloud configuration, hardening, and even monitoring. So this way that will help your team to learn and to shadow the experts until they reach to a level that they can do it on their own. This is the right recipe if you want to go to the cloud. But I've seen a lot of customers, they just hired someone or a company, asked them, okay, please migrate such and such servers, and that's it. They finish their job, but without considering the financial aspect. And there are stories where customers, they migrated back to physical because it's not working for them financially. And that's because they have not done their financial calculation job. And the second one is shifting to the cloud without looking at security and thinking that, okay, cloud X or cloud Y, they will protect my workloads. But unfortunately, it is written in the EOLA, it is written in the agreement that it is a shared responsibility. This is your portion, this is my portion. And if you agreed on or you accepted the contract without reading, then that's something you can't argue with, because they have already protected themselves from such kind of concerns.
Right.
Samer, if I may just add one more thing to what I said. I completely agree with you, the approach that you mentioned. There's another aspect which we probably didn't mention just now, but quickly, to be very, I think we have a few minutes left. Sure. There is also a set of standards that cloud service providers have to get certified on, like SOC, right? Mm-hmm. SOC standards, IEC standards, ISO standards. That the cloud service provider are actually certifying the entire infrastructure on these standards. So it's important for someone who's adopting a cloud to understand those as well, because when it comes to e-discovery, and I'm not going to go into details, or when it comes to any kind of audit trails or any breaches, etc., these standards, you need to understand what they mean, because you can request those reports from them to see what they are complied to and how that reflects on your business. Just a quick side note, Sam. Sorry.
Yeah, that was a great one. Great that you added, because those cloud providers, they need to attract customers from different sectors. So if you are attracting healthcare, they have to regulate, they have to comply with HIPAA, same thing with PCI, same thing with other sectors. So that will make sure you can present those compliance reports to your management, to your finance and audit, to show them that, yes, we are doing our job. We are working with a certified cloud provider that is able to protect our data, or they are already protecting the data centers, and they have the proper controls and compliance reports.
Ahmed, Ayed, thank you very much for your valuable inputs. And to conclude, to our audience, the cloud technology is a technology that is here to stay. And in the Middle East and Africa, we need to make the decision based on our business, based on our need, based on the problem we want to solve, on what and how and why we need to move to the cloud, as long as we comply with the frameworks and the regulations and keep the cybersecurity in mind. Thank you very much. Please like and follow the page, and let us know if you have any suggestions for the next sessions. Thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you.